Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm Blake Fisher. I'm a political junkie, so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thanks for joining me. I know your time is valuable. I do appreciate you being here. The plan this week was to talk about the Trump trial in New York, the hush money trial, as it's been known in New York. And I figured instead of speculating before a verdict came in, let's just wait until a verdict comes out. And I mean, that's what I'm saying I was doing. Really, I just didn't get to record an episode on Wednesday even though I wanted to. And then I was like, well, I'll do it Thursday. And then we had the verdict. And I was like, well, let me just retool this whole thing and we'll talk about it with the verdict. And it was guilty, in case you haven't heard. You may not have been paying attention to this case at all. So I just wanted to briefly go over what happened here. So a former president, for the first time, is found guilty on felony charges. And this is unprecedented, obviously. And we don't know how this is going to affect the election. How is it going to affect Trump's chances in November? Is this a witch hunt, as Trump and his MAGA sort of people claim? Are all of these legal woes just lawfare, as it's been known to call, sort of this way to wage war, but via the law? Or is this like a vindication of anti-Trump people that have been waiting for this for, I guess since he came down the golden escalator? There's some people that have hated him for that long. I certainly don't like the guy, but let's discuss this. I think that this is worth talking about. So let's start with calling it a hush money trial. This is one of those things that I kind of wish, I think these words matter when we're talking about things in this happens all the time where we label something in a way that biases the coverage from the get-go. So this is called a hush money trial, and I get why it's called a hush money trial, because that certainly rolls off the tongue a lot better than calling it the misdemeanor business records past the statute of limitations bootstrapped to an unnamed felony in attempts to upgrade the charges trial. That wouldn't fit very neatly in a headline, obviously. So we've referred to it as the hush money trial. But one thing that I think is really important about calling it a hush money trial is that paying someone money to stay quiet about an affair is not illegal. So calling it a hush money trial sort of infers that it is. And I don't love that. Like I said, not defending Donald Trump here. I think he's gross and he's morally unfit to be the dog catcher in my local city, right? I don't trust him at all. And I certainly think that having sex with a porn star while your wife is at home taking care of your newborn baby is really not okay. I don't want leaders that do that kind of thing, because if they'll do that to their own wife, what will they do to us? If you don't have that kind of loyalty to your own family, to pretend that you're going to have any sort of loyalty to the country or to your office or your oath, to me just seems absolutely silly to pretend that that's possible for someone to have both of those things happen at the same time. So anyway, calling it a hush money trial, though, I just don't love it, because like I said, it infers that paying someone money for a non-disclosure agreement, which is essentially what this was, is illegal. That's not really what the crime is. So what really happened here is that this is the New York State trial. This is sometimes a little bit confusing because there have been 4 separate indictments. So we're just talking about the New York criminal trial. It's the first indictment that came down before the 2 federal ones and before the Georgia racketeering one. And so this was the first one out the gate. This is the first indictment. This is from a DA, Alvin Bragg, who specifically campaigned on going after Donald Trump. There are all sorts of really bad precedents there, in my opinion. To ever have a DA running on, I'm going to go after a specific person and try to prosecute them for crimes, I think is really, really dangerous. It's a dangerous precedent to set, especially when it is politically the person on the other side of the aisle. Politically, it's a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're in a blue state. There are just some really bad precedents to be set with it. I think people will use it going forward to go after their political enemies, because we have too many laws in this country. We've criminalized everything. Really, we have criminalized so much that if you want to go after, if you find a person and then want to try to find a crime they've committed, it's pretty easy to do if you're willing to put a few $1 million of resources behind it to go after that person. And this is not to say that I buy into that everything all of the legal trouble that Trump has is lawfare, or that all of it is a witch hunt. It's not. I think that the federal indictments are very serious and are legitimate crimes that are spelled out would be crimes for everyone else. In fact, lots of other people have been prosecuted for those crimes, but this one in New York has not been. So this really whole thing has been a Rorschach test. The whole trial. If you were anti-Trump, it was one thing to you. If you're pro-Trump, it's another. The guilty verdict means different things to different people that have already sorted. And I think this is only going to matter at the margins. I think that you've probably already made your mind up about Donald Trump one way or another. Chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you have made up your mind about Donald Trump. Just a guess. You either are for him, you're going to vote for him, or at least you're enough for him because you're against Biden, or you don't like him at all, which is where I'm at. I wouldn't vote for him. I didn't vote for him in 2016, didn't vote for him in 2020, probably will not vote for him in 2024. And so to me, like, this is not changing a lot, but the margins matter in this case. And so here's the trial in just the simplest form. I'm not going to go over detail because you can look into that if you want to, and I don't think it matters. So the crime specifically is falsifying business records, because what happened is that he paid Stormy Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, who's a porn star who he had an affair with, allegedly. I say allegedly because he denies that he had the affair, which I think is on its face ridiculous that anyone believes that this did not happen. I think even Trump supporters understand that this happened. And I'll get to why I think that was a bad defense on his part. I actually think him and his defense did himself no favors in this trial. But so what happened is that the Access Hollywood tape came out in October, and this is all in the trial. And after the Access Hollywood tape came out, that's when Stormy Daniels was going to come out and say that she had an affair with him as well. And the speculation around this, and when you look at her testimony in the trial, which was lewd, to use that's the nicest way I can put it. It's lewd. And I don't think the details really mattered, but the timeline mattered in the sense that she was going to come out through Michael Cohen, Trump's sort of fixer lawyer. He paid her $130,000, and then Trump reimbursed that via a personal account and wrote it off as legal expenses, right? And which they were not really, because he was just passing it through his lawyer to get to Stormy Daniels. So that's where the falsification of business records comes from, is that the business record should not have been recorded as a business expense, or it shouldn't have been recorded as, Alvin Bragg is saying that should not have been recorded as a lawyer expense, because it wasn't. It was just he was just a pass through. So that's the falsification. That law only has a 2-year statute of limitations. So this happened in 2016 and is a misdemeanor, not a felony. So how do we get to having a felony? So we get to having a felony because Alvin Bragg says that you can upgrade a misdemeanor to a felony if it is knowingly used in the process of committing another crime. What's interesting about New York law is that it does not say anything about having to name what the other crime is. Now, I think that's a problem with the law. I think that that's an unfortunate thing that I don't think the judge in this trial should get as much crap for, because he is following the law. It's not his fault that New York has bad law that they should change. I don't see how it's fair. I don't see how there's any way that the criminal justice system is fair to say, hey, here's this crime that's a misdemeanor, but we can upgrade it to a felony if we can just make up that you were maybe doing it in connection to another crime that we don't have to name in an indictment or in the prosecution. We can let the jury just decide if there was another crime, and we can infer that there was another crime, and you don't even have to have been charged or convicted of the other crime. And in this case, the other crime that they're trying to say he potentially broke is campaign finance law, which is a federal crime. Not even under New York's jurisdiction, but it doesn't specify in New York law that it has to be under New York's jurisdiction. It doesn't mention that he has to be convicted or anything of that federal crime. That's where my problem is with this whole thing, is that that's where the upgrade for the misdemeanor. And that's how you get past the statute of limitation, which he still got past with some shady stuff because he said, well, Trump wasn't in the state and he was president, and so you got to extend it. And there are some reasons to do that, obviously. But this is clearly a case that no one else would have ever been prosecuted for. This 8 years after it happens, falsification of business records with the upgrade to the felonies. It's never happened. There's no example in New York of this actually being a thing that they go after people for. It's because his name's Donald Trump. But here's what's really interesting about all of this to me is that, so that's that's what happened, is that, take away all the other details, what he's being convicted for is that he paid off someone to stay quiet about an affair. They're saying, the prosecution is saying, because he didn't want that to come out because he was trying to influence the election. So he's basically saying he defrauded the American people by not letting them know this information. We already had the Access Hollywood tape and still elected Donald Trump in 2016. So I don't necessarily buy that if this story would have also come out in October of 2016, that he would have lost the election. But it doesn't really matter, because what's interesting about this to me, and I thought this sort of myself, but Sarah Isgur, who, there's a great podcast. If you want to get into the legal weeds of legal stuff, listen to Advisory Opinions. It's David French from the New York Times and Sarah Isgur from the Dispatch. And Sarah specifically is fun to listen to because she's not only a lawyer, but she also has ran campaigns before. And so she understands the presidential campaign aspect of this, and it's sort of the campaign finance law and the law side of things. And so to me, that's an interesting opinion to listen to, right? Her point is that, how can this be both things at the same time? They're saying that he falsified the business records and it should have been written as a campaign expense, and therefore he violated campaign finance law. But if he would have paid Stormy Daniels with campaign finance, like with campaign funds, that's also illegal. So what you see, there's no way to win here. They're saying paying a porn star is a campaign expense. That's essentially what the verdict says now, because they're saying because he falsified it and tried to hide it as not a campaign expense, but it really was, that's a felony crime. But at the same time, if he would have used campaign expenses to pay for hush money going to a porn star for an NDA, that wouldn't fly with the FEC. It just would not. So that's illegal. And if you don't believe me, look back at John Edwards. Remember in 2008, we had John Edwards. It was kind of a tight race between Obama, Hillary Clinton, and John Edwards. That was sort of our people that we were looking at in 2008. And it turns out that while campaigning for president, John Edwards was soliciting donor money to pay a woman he had had an affair with and a child with, while, by the way, his wife was sick with cancer. Pretty gross guy, right? He got off on those charges. There was a hung jury, I think, in it, if I remember correctly. But the point is, that was a federal trial that they brought that said, like, hey, you used campaign funds to pay off someone that was not a campaign expense. And there was at least a little bit of weirdness there, because they were saying it's campaign funds because you went to your donors. And he said, no, my donors, that was me going to them with a personal favor. But it was obviously he was saying, and it wasn't to influence the election, it was to protect my family. Well, I don't buy that any more than I buy this. I think that Trump was trying to silence Stephanie Clifford, aka Stormy Daniels. I think he was trying to buy her silence, no doubt about that. And I think he knew what he was doing. And I think the prosecution laid out very well that was what was happening, is that he knew it was happening. But that's not illegal, is my point, is that this, like, if he paid personally out of his checking account, for this, then it's not a violation. To say that it is a campaign violation, but if he would have used the fund, does this make any sense? Am I going crazy to think that they could get him either way? So if he used campaign funds, it's illegal. If he didn't use campaign funds, it's illegal too. That, to me, is going to be the thing he's going to be able to appeal on this. That's the first thing he's going to go after. His lawyers are going to say, how can this be illegal both ways? All right. So the John Edwards thing is a good example to look back up to and go, well, look, he did almost the exact same thing and was tried for it. Like, the federal government brought charges against him. So here, let's go over a few more things that happened in the case. So the other thing that happened here is that Michael Cohen, who is Trump's fixer lawyer, who did this pass-through sort of scheme of sorts, he took a guilty plea in a federal case for campaign finance, like basically conspiracy to commit campaign finance, break that law. So some people say that Trump has to be guilty of that crime already because he's the other conspirator in that thing. But the federal government chose not to go after Donald Trump for that. They looked at the evidence. They chose not to prosecute Trump or indict him on the campaign finance kind of stuff. Cohen's thing is because Cohen was doing other shady stuff, and I think that it's a little bit different. But Cohen is kind of the star witness of this case. And so I just think it's asinine to say that both things are illegal. And there's nothing, by the way, calling this a hush money trial, going back to that, is, again, inferring that paying someone for an NDA is illegal, but that's not illegal. So that's where I have problems with this case. And like I said, am I shedding huge tears for Donald Trump for getting caught up in a thing like with a legal loophole when he smashes all the rules all the time? No, I'm really not. But what I don't like about it is the precedent it's going to set for future stuff. If you don't believe for a second that a red state DA is going to go after Biden or Hunter Biden or Pickett, pick your Democrat that is high up the chain, that's not going to find some obscure law they might have broken to try to indict them on it, I think you're foolish. I think that what we've done is kind of let the genie out of the bottle here, and I don't think there's any way we're going to get it back in. To me, everything about our political environment right now says that nothing is going to be cooled down. Everything just gets heated up more and more. Everything gets elevated more and more. Both sides are then preemptively doing bad things because they're like, well, the other side would do it too, so we better do it first. And I just think that's what we're heading towards. I think we're heading towards a situation where the courts are going to become, I don't think that this is a case of like total, like the law is there. The New York law is a badly written law. And I think that what they did is correct within the law. I just think the law is really bad. And I think that Trump's going to have a case on appeal for that. But I do think it's gross to go after someone as you're running for the office to say, I'm going to go after that person, Donald Trump, and I'm going to prosecute him. And that's why you should elect me. I'm sort of rethinking the whole way that we elect our district attorneys and the people that prosecute crimes, because there are several problems with it. There's that on one side of it. And then you look at the sort of progressive DA thing that's happening in a lot of blue cities where they're electing people specifically not to prosecute crimes, specifically for the case of racial justice, right? And we're seeing those cities kind of fall apart because the crime rates are skyrocketing because essentially people know they can get away with crime. So what bothers me about both instances is it's perverting the law as written by our legislators. So we elect legislators to write these laws, and they're not perfect laws all the time. Like I said, I think the New York one should have if you're going to bootstrap this misdemeanor to upgrade to a felony, you have to name the other crime and charge with the other crime. That makes sense to me. And they should fix that, I think. And we need to fix lots of laws. There's all sorts of situations we just saw in Arizona where after, their state Supreme Court or whatever ruled that, look, this law from the 1800s about abortion is legal because it's still in the books and it takes precedent over these other laws. And, the legislature got together and they changed it to be, I think, 15 weeks. So the point is, there are bad laws on the books. And so it's easy for DAs to selectively find ones. And in other cases, just ignore them entirely. So it says this is illegal and this is prosecutable, but I'm not going to prosecute it because criminal justice reform, racial justice, whatever you want to call it. And I think both are deteriorating our trust in the legal system, which is bad because then what you're inviting people to do is take the law into their own hands, which we do not want, right? I certainly don't want that. So so there are stupid legal loopholes all over the place. And including in this case, I don't think what Alvin Bragg did was illegal. I don't think what the judge did was illegal. People are like, how dare you let this happen? But like I said, the judge has to follow the law that's written. The judge does not change the law. He just follows the law, right? I just don't. So there's three things that they were trying to prove in this thing. To get the guilty verdict, which obviously the jury did agree with, there are three things they had to do. They had to prove that the business records regarding, the payments that Michael Cohen made, that they were false. So the business record that said, I paid Michael Cohen for legal expenses, that was false. That one's easy because we know that was just a pass through. In fact, he paid him more so that he could claim the taxes. So it did it. I think the Trump check to Michael Cohen was like $160,000 so that he could pay the taxes, which I think Michael Cohen just actually admitted on the stand that he stole. By the way, he didn't pay the taxes. Anyway, it's sort of interesting. And the second thing they had to prove is that Trump was responsible for those false business records and had the intent to defraud, I guess, someone, as in, I guess he had to know that the records were false and that he didn't want someone to know what the true nature of those records were. Okay, so that also seems pretty easy to prove. I think that it's obvious that he was trying to pay off a porn star and he's trying to hide that. So he's trying to hide that from the public, obviously. So he also doesn't want it on the books. That makes sense to me. So I think the first two, really easy to prove. I think they successfully did so. The third one's more tricky because they had to prove that Trump's purpose for falsifying the business records was to cover up another crime. But they never had to state the other crime. They speculated what other crimes it could be. And this is one important thing. You may have heard this week that the judge's instructions to the jury were that you don't have to come back unanimous. You can not agree on the crime. That was taken out of context. What the jury instructions were from the judge were, look, everyone has to be unanimous on the guilty verdict. You have to all agree. All 12 of you have to agree he's guilty. But you can have different opinions about what the other crime was. Because New York law says we don't have to state that, you can say it's campaign finance law. You can say it was a New York campaign finance law problem, which doesn't make a lot of sense because my understanding from the lawyers I read is that the federal run would have precedence over the state one. So that one shouldn't seem to matter. There was some things that said it was a New York state law, potentially with another sort of business record kind of thing. So the jury instructions where you don't have to agree on what the other crime is. I think that's the most obvious place that an appeal is going to be made. Is like, hey, you can't let them just speculate on the other crime. So I think the third one's harder because you have to prove that Donald Trump knew he was committing a crime. It's really interesting that he has to know he was committing a crime when we can't define what the crime is. Again, is it a crime to pay a porn star hush money with campaign funds? Seems that it would be, according to the John Edwards trial, right? Federal government would consider that being illegal. But this is also saying it's a crime if he doesn't use campaign funds, because this is a campaign expense and it should have been written as a campaign expense. So I think the third one's weird here. And I think that that's where there's going to be problems. So what happens now? He's guilty. What happens now? Obviously, there's going to be appeals. Like I said, the sentencing is July 11th, which is just a few days before the Republican National Convention, where he will be officially nominated as the Republican candidate. And it basically is like, is this going to matter to voters? As I mentioned earlier, I don't think if you are all in on Trump that this is going to make a difference to you. In fact, it might fire you up. His campaign website broke last night because of the amount of people trying to donate to him. Democrats are trying everything to stop Donald Trump, and everything they do bounces right off of him. Even getting the guilty verdict is getting him fundraising right now. And that's the other problem I have with all this. I think that all of this is the wrong way to campaign against the guy. I think that there are a million other things that you could do that would be more convincing. There are several things that you can talk about why Donald Trump is unfit for office. There's all sorts of things that you can talk about. To me, this is too nuanced to try to say well, he's a criminal. And I think what they're hoping is that the guilty of a felony is all that people will look into. And to be fair, voters on the margins that haven't made up their minds yet about Donald Trump, it probably will. There's actually some indication in earlier polls. This is before the trial wrapped up, but in places like Wisconsin, that would say there's a 10-point swing. He's up by 6 points when you just put him Trump versus Biden. But if you say Trump versus Biden and Trump's been convicted of a felony, Biden's up 4 points. So there's a 10-point swing there in some of these states that Trump has to win. I think we'll see in a couple weeks as polls actually come out. Are people paying attention to this right now? Does it matter to them? Are those polls going to move in those swing states? I think that's what we're going to have to pay attention to. And some people, of course, think the polls are completely wrong. I think that there's a lot of Democrats that are just in denial about the fact that Trump, I think if the election were held, let's not say today, let's say 2 days ago before the guilty verdict, that he would have won the election. Now, there's 5 months still till November, and so there's a lot that can happen between now and then. But there's some interesting thought processes here. So another Chris Starwalt, who's on News Nation and also writes for The Dispatch, he writes, he thinks that Trump being busy with the trial is actually not a bad thing because he's stuck in New York. He was only campaigning kind of around the New York area. He is continually talking about this unfair witch hunt trial and not really talking about policy or, it's an all-consuming thing for him, and that's actually good. It kind of keeps a leash on him. He says, what Republicans should worry about much more is a Trump acquittal beyond the reach of the judge and jury and prime for revenge. And emboldened Trump would be hell on wheels. Ahead in the polls and having beaten the rap, Trump would come careening into a general election, as always, his own worst enemy. Because Trump tends to put his own foot in his mouth all the time, right? And I'm also curious, he held a rally in the Bronx and it got some news, because not normally the group of people that you're expecting to see at a Trump rally. I wonder if he's really leaning into this, like, hey, the criminal justice system is against me, and trying to lean into specifically young black male vote with that. He had convicted criminals on stage with him at that Bronx thing. And I just think that that's what he's kind of leaning into. He's kind of going like, look, if this is the hand I'm dealt, I might as well go all in on it. And it's obviously working. He raised a bunch of money, and we'll see if it actually moves him in the polls with that specific demographic. I'm not sure if it will or not, but I think that we'll see what the polls say. I really don't understand why this one had to be first. I really do wish none of the other trials are going to happen before November, by the way. Like, there are 3 other indictments. There's one about the documents that were in Mar-a-Lago. There's one about his behavior between the November election in 2020 and January 6th. Basically, all of the Stop the Steal stuff, which was absolute lies. Donald Trump 100% lost the 2020 election. He still can't admit that. And, and then there's one in Georgia about sort of the same thing. It's basically him trying to persuade Georgia to swing the election his way. And then there's another federal one about, so that's the 4 thing. That's the 4 indictments. None of the other ones are going to happen this year. And it's not like Trump is going to spend time in jail probably about this either, because he'll get sentenced on July 11th, but he's an old guy. He doesn't have any prior record. This is a paper crime. This is not a violent crime. But they could put him in jail based on his behavior because he kept breaking the gag order. He's not admitting guilt or showing any remorse, and that sometimes goes into judges. But I mean, here's the problem. How are you going to put him in jail anyway? He wouldn't be in jail before November anyway. And if he wins in November, he's not going to go to jail while he's the president. So I don't see him spending any time in jail. I think that's unlikely. I think it's going to be some sort of fine and probation. And the dream that some people have of seeing Donald Trump behind bars, some people are just absolutely salivating for that, which, again, I don't like the guy. I'm not like, that's not my dream scenario. My dream scenario is that he goes away and we decide to reject him. Obviously, that's not happening. Republicans are all in on him. And that's why this is called the homeless conservative, is because I don't feel like I've got a place to be, because I think that he doesn't represent any of my ideals or any of my policy preferences, and certainly not my moral desires for a politician. So I just wonder where we're going to go from here. This is kind of, who knows? We'll see what happens specifically. Like I said, the 2 things are watch for polls to change in those swing states. One thing I don't like about this that I should mention is that the common thread from the MAGA world has been that this is Joe Biden orchestrating all this stuff. This is Joe Biden pulling the strings and using the executive branch to weaponizing it essentially to go after his political enemies. Biden did a pretty good job for the most part leading up to this trial and during it of staying out of it. And then for whatever reason in the last couple of weeks, he's just decided to throw that out the window. We had a situation where when agreeing to the debates, the tweet was, I hear you're free on Wednesdays, which was a jab at Trump to say, they didn't have trials on Wednesday. He was just in court Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And so it was a jab at him like, hey, you're in criminal court. I know you're free on Wednesdays. They started printing it on T-shirts. To me, that's beneath the office of the presidency. And just because Trump did all sorts of things that beneath the office of the presidency doesn't mean that Biden should. Biden ran as this adult that it's going to be this return to normalcy. But to me, that was the first thing that he did that was just kind of gross to say, to jump into the fray of like, hey, I hear you're free on Wednesdays, to kind of reiterate that he's under criminal trial. I didn't like that. And then he had a freaking rally outside. I mean, essentially, Biden wasn't there, but it was a Democratic, it was a campaign thing with Robert De Niro and the cops that were at January 6th speaking out against Donald Trump. And they claim they didn't do it. They didn't pick the location because it's where Donald Trump was on trial. They picked the location because that's where the press was every day. Maybe. Again, if I were the president of the United States and my campaign wanted to send a freaking actor out to the outside the Trump trial to make the case that people shouldn't vote for Donald Trump, I'd say absolutely not. Again, what's more important? I think that Joe Biden should be the adult here, but he can't be because honestly, his staff is really young and online and progressive, and I'm not buying into the narrative that like he's this puppet that people are controlling, but he is giving in to those people a lot more than he should, and I think it's to his detriment. Every time he does this kind of thing, it's not helped him. He's losing the election right now to Donald Trump in those swing states, and those are going to matter. And it's because he's got to own what he's done wrong. People don't like his inflationary spending that took place. They don't like the regulations that their businesses have had. They don't like the student loan forgiveness stuff that he keeps trying to do, despite the Supreme Court saying it's illegal. He keeps trying over and over again. They don't like a lot of things about Biden, and it's making Trump seem rosy in comparison because people look back to 2019 or 2016 and go, man, my wallet felt a little heavier then. Felt like my expenses were a lot lower. And they're not wrong about that. Inflation's caused everything to go up. Housing is another thing. We've got a shortage of housing, and housing is really expensive, and everything that Biden's doing to help is hurting. There's no relief in sight, and he's desperately throwing stuff at the wall now to see if it can change. That's why he agrees to a debate in June. There's never been a presidential debate in June because we don't even nominate people till July or August. The presidential debates are always in September at the earliest, normally October. And they're in June because Biden is desperate, I think. I think he's finally realizing, the people around him are realizing that the polls are maybe not wrong. Now we'll see if this switches it. We'll see what happens. I think the debate will be interesting. I'm excited about there not being an audience because I hate audiences at debates. I don't think we should ever have them. Because it doesn't matter if you tell them to try to be quiet and stuff like that. They're going to cheer and they're going to laugh and they're going to... No, I think if we're going to have a debate, let's get two people on there with moderators and let's let them have a discussion. Let's not do the thing where we pander the audience and try to get cheers and boos and things like that. I think our politics is already really childish. Let's not make it more childish. I don't think that part of the debate really matters. So we will see what happens coming up in the next few weeks. I'm excited to see polls, see if anything changed, but I don't love that we had to use the criminal justice system to do this. You know, in an ideal world, Republicans in the Senate would have just convicted him of the impeachment after the January 6th riots and said, this guy's not fit to be running the country, and we should make sure he never runs again. If Republicans in the Senate would have had a spine to do so then, we wouldn't have to be in any of this right now. But they didn't. They said, you know what we're going to let the criminal justice system, we'll let the courts decide. Well, now that the courts have decided, if you notice, MAGA people are like, the courts are corrupt too. How dare they? Let the people decide. And then if the people decide, like in 2020, and they decide to vote for someone else other than Trump, they say it was stolen. The election was stolen. The people didn't really decide this. So you see how this is just cyclical? We just keep making excuses for picking this guy. And Republicans, this time, it's not like 2016. Overwhelmingly, a majority of people in every primary in the Republican primary voted to have Trump. They want this guy with all of his baggage, with all of the, really bad behavior, with all of the authoritarian, with the promises of retaliation. They want this guy, which is why I'm not sure that this party has a place for people like me anymore, is because they've explicitly said so. I'm just discouraged by all of this, honestly, because we keep picking this guy and we could have gotten rid of him a long time ago. I also wish, for the sake of these indictments, I wish they would have come before he chose to run for president. I think, again, his enemies thought he'll just go away. I think everyone hoped he would just go away. I think that's what Republicans in the Senate hoped. Look, January 6th was bad enough. People are going to be tired of this. They're just not going to want him anymore. He'll just go away. Everyone pretending that Donald Trump's just going to go away is foolish. I also think it's foolish in this case to think that this guilty verdict's going to make him go away. I've not seen the evidence that that's the case yet. Yes, of course, there's some polls that say he might lose some of those swing states, but it also might fire up a bunch of people that weren't going to vote. There might be people that are kind of like in that 77% of people that really don't like either one of these guys, Biden or Trump, but they're going to say, you know what, this feels unfair. Because it does. I think this trial is ridiculous. Never should have been brought. I think the other three, specifically the two federal ones, are much more serious. I think the documents case is slam dunk. He was retaining documents he knew he wasn't supposed to have. They asked for them back. He lied about the ones he still had, pretended he didn't have it. He was sharing national secrets that people did not have clearance for with people like journalists. He had classified documents in his bedroom. This is a slam dunk case. What he did was illegal in the documents case. It was a much more serious indictment. This one is not from New York. And I think it's made the other ones seem less serious because people go like, yeah, we heard about this first case that came against him. It seemed kind of like a sham. And then they just stopped paying attention to the other stuff. It's the same thing with Russiagate. The blow up over, oh, Trump is colluding with Russia and there's these tapes of him peeing on people. The ridiculousness of all of that meant that every other claim they had against him was written off as a lie because that one was a lie. And it was a ridiculous thing to go in on without any evidence. And the media and Democrats keep doing this to themselves. They keep crying wolf. They call everyone a racist. They call everyone a Nazi. And then someone finally comes along that's actually not a good person. But it's like when you threw the word racist at Mitt Romney in 2012, claimed he was a racist, and Joe Biden himself said, this guy wants to put you guys back in chains to an audience of black people. That's what he said about Mitt Romney. So when you then say that about Donald Trump, we just go, yeah, we've heard this before, and Mitt Romney seems like a pretty nice guy. Say what you will about him, you can disagree with him, but like I don't think anyone's disputing the fact that he's not someone that wants to put black people back in chains, right? There's nothing that indicates that that's what he wants to do. And that was a smear, and they knew it was false. And then, the things they say about Trump might be true. I think he does want to be an authoritarian. He clearly tried to stage a coup in 2020. It's not speculation to say that. It's not like, oh, that's a crazy thing to say that he'd try to stay in the office in 2029 if he's reelected in 2024. I don't think that's a crazy stretch. But no one believes it on the right anymore because we've heard this over and over and over again. I just think that everything about this is digging us further into a hole that I think is going to be really hard to get out of. Because I foresee Republican lawmakers or DAs, prosecutors going after Democrats now. I think you're going to start seeing that. I think that there's no way we don't see a situation where Joe Biden is indicted by a red state. I don't know what for. I'm not saying it's going to be a crime he actually did, but I don't think this was a crime that Trump did, frankly. Or, past the misdemeanor of falsifying business records. That's a misdemeanor with a 2-year statutory limit. So we'll see what happens. That's it for me today. Thanks for joining me. And what you can do to help me out is obviously leave a review on whatever you're listening to this on. That really helps. You can just do the 5-star review. Obviously 5 stars is what I prefer. But if you hate it, I guess give it a 1 star. But 5's better, right? You can also follow along on Instagram and YouTube at The Homeless Conservative. You can email me at Blake at The Homeless Conservative. I like hearing from you. What are your opinions? Feel free to jump in the comments. Tell me where you disagree with me. I'm happy to have a pleasant discussion with you because that's what this whole show is about. I know it's not really a discussion when it's just me on these solo episodes. I prefer to have conversations with people, but maybe I will try to find a lawyer guest that we can talk more about this, but I don't necessarily think we need to talk more about this trial. It's going to go to appeals. I think it's over. I don't think that this trial is the most interesting part of this campaign, and we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's it for me. I'll catch you next time.